Welcome, ladies and gents, to another episode of the Wrestling Connection podcast. Yes, we are here, ladies and gents. Thank you very much for inviting us into your homes, onto your phones, and maybe into your ears. Who knows? This is episode number 3, ladies and gents. We don't want to sound weird, but we are here for another episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are going a little bit left field this week. For the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about things and memories in wrestling that we love and that we have fond memories of in terms of watching the product. But this week, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to talk about our own personal experiences at live wrestling events. That's right, from WWE to TNA to independent promotions all over the country. We're going to be talking about our favourite memories from those shows right here. Hello again, everybody. Welcome. This is the Wrestling Connection, episode number 3. My name is Chris. This is Glenn. Glenn, I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for joining me again. How are you feeling this week, my brother?
I am feeling a little bit claustrophobic. Not because I am in my relatively small recording studio / spare room slash laundry room / office / gym. It sounds like I've got this lush room. It's a nice pokey wee room which doubles as an everything. But nice. The lockdown is starting to make me just go a little bit crazy, and I think I might just get to that point where I snap. You know, like the Austin heel turn when he all of a sudden liked to hug people, and I like to hug people as anyway. But to answer your question, Chris, I'm fine. Stop asking me.
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Have you got a guitar? You can start singing Kumbaya.
Actually, the guitar's in the next room because my wonderful wife, who is a music teacher, was using it. So she has the thing. The thing that annoys me about that, but I also love it though, is that Austin, when he sang Kumbaya, he just strummed the empty chord. He didn't do anything with the frets.
That's right.
Kumbaya. But that made it better in a weird way.
Yeah.
I am a big defender of Austin's heel turn.
Yeah, me too.
I love that.
I think he has a hard time with that as well, and I love the stuff with Angle. You know, Angle had like the wee cowboy hat on, and he was like, yippee-ki-yay, and he was like, hey, Steve, you want a carrot? But anyway, I love all that stuff. But you've had a busy week, my friend. You have started a new job, kind of, you know, as weird as it is being from home and being in quarantine, that sort of thing. How's the new job going?
It's going really well. It's bizarre, you know, like with any job in any line of work, you think about the first day and you get the usual nerves about meeting new people and the whole imposter syndrome thing. And it's weird that I still felt that, even though I kind of knew for a while now that my first day teaching at this new school would be in my spare room / gym / recording studio. So
/ classroom.
/ classroom. So it's been a good first couple of days, and all my colleagues are just so wonderful and welcoming. So you know, I've got a lot to be grateful for with this line of work. Quarantine is difficult for everyone, but I definitely think for me it could be a lot worse.
Yeah. Awesome, that's good though. I'm very happy that you're settling in nicely and that we can still be here together recording a new episode of the Wrestling Connection podcast. Here's a question, but has anybody ever come up to you, like a student or like a pupil or something, and been like, quizzed you on wrestling? Like, have you ever mentioned wrestling before in class? Anybody asked you any questions?
Yeah, it does happen because I like to usually, like the beginning of term, get to know the kids that I teach, and so that usually means a bit of sharing about hobbies and interests. You would deal with teenagers, they can be quite inward and they don't want to share stuff. So, but relationships is so important to teaching. You need to be willing to know your pupils, and I'm not saying you're pals with them and you go out with them at the weekend. I'm not suggesting that, but there needs to be like a positive relationship there. So I usually would say, I'm Mr. Fraser. I like gaming. I like wrestling. I like Harry Potter. Obviously, I love reading. And there's always a few ears that would prick up when you mention like the wrestling side of things. So even in my last school, which I just finished working at before the Easter holidays, there would be a few kids that would come up to me like throughout the day, or if you cross them in the corridor, and they would ask, "Oh, hey sir, did you see who won the Royal Rumble? See Big Drew won the Rumble?" I'm like, yeah, that was awesome. So it's one of those things. I'm sure when you were a kid at school, you maybe took part in that trick of trying to get the teacher to talk about something else and go on a tangent so that delayed the lesson. They're really good at that with me, because if they started me on wrestling, that was risky territory. Now that I'm a bit more experienced, I'm good at reining it in, and I think my lessons don't have much of a risk of going down wrestling tangents anymore.
Good, but it's either a good or a bad thing, I don't know, but I'll tell you, there's a place we can go down those wrestling tangents, and it's right here on the Wrestling Connection. So yeah, we're here for episode number 3. Thanks everybody for listening to episodes 1 and 2. Hope that everybody enjoyed them. It means a lot to us that you're continuing to give us your support and your praise and your critiques and all those good stuff. Any comments are welcome in any way here on the Wrestling Connection. So I'm just going to start things off properly and ask you the most generic question of the podcast here, Glenn. What have you been watching this week?
Well, in terms of pro wrestling, again, apart from your usual kind of highlights of Raw and SmackDown, I'm continuing with my marathon, of which I'm now on 2002. Just today, I was watching the last ever WWF and Raw and SmackDown. And the next item on my list is Insurrection 2002, which is of course the same tour that you might mention later on. You mentioned it a couple of weeks back when you spoke about your wrestling story.
Yep.
That Insurrection tour. There's something I need to tell you that you're going to love about this that I picked up from when I was watching. I don't know if you were aware of this, but on the last Raw, the last WWF Raw, which is the last WWF Raw before they went on that tour, where you went to see them as a wee boy, where the plane ride from hell happened as well.
Yes.
There's a match that opens up that Raw. I believe it's between Jeff Hardy and Eddie Guerrero for the Intercontinental title.
Okay.
And during the match, JR is promoting the UK tour. He's saying, we're going to the UK for the Insurrection tour. We're going all over Europe. We're going to Germany. We're going to blah, blah, blah. We're going to Scotland. And so they mentioned Scotland in passing. And then I can't remember what he actually asks. I think this isn't the exact question, but Jerry Lawler says something like, "Do you think they know what a frog splash is in Glasgow, Scotland?" And JR says, "Oh, hell if I know." And then the beauty, JR goes, "Aye, laddie." And Jerry Lawler goes, "Aye, laddie." And they have I swear to you, look up on the network. It's like the last Raw of April. It's like April 29th or something. First match, Jeff Hardy versus Edge, and you'll hear JR and Jerry Lawler going, "Aye, laddie." I love that
that's like the chosen phrase. Oh, brilliant. I didn't know that.
Yep. Just absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so I've been watching that kind of very early Ruthless Aggression era stuff. What about you, Chris?
Well, last week I had a pretty weird week in terms of watching wrestling. I think I might have topped myself this week. So last week I talked about how I was listening to What Happened When with Tony Schiavone, and I was listening to some WCW watch-alongs from 2000 with, of course, Conrad Thompson. And last week I listened to War Games 2000 because I'm a bit fuzzy in terms of WCW 2000. I know a little bit of it because of my childhood, but when it comes to that sort of stuff, I'm not really as clued up as I maybe should be. Yeah. So I was trying to check out some of that. But you know, when Conrad posts these podcasts, right? It's always good because it's always like detailing certain things, and I like to know in advance what they're going to be talking about, so I can kind of prep a little bit, and then I can kind of watch along or even listen along to the show with Conrad and with JR or Tony or Bruce Pritchard or whoever it is. Well, this week it was one Eric Bischoff who he was talking about, you know, he's got the podcast 83 Weeks, and me and Glenn actually saw Eric Bischoff together. We met Eric Bischoff together in 2016. And they actually hinted this past week that Inside the Ropes might be doing a second tour with Eric Bischoff as well, maybe sometime in the future.
I hope they do. I really hope they do. That was a great show. And Inside the Ropes, no one does it better than them, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, really good show. So I was checking out the 83 Weeks podcast with Eric Bischoff, and for the first time, Eric covered a TNA pay-per-view.
Ah.
So I was all right. Well, I've always liked TNA. I've always been a TNA guy. It's always been like my alternative because I never grew up around WCW and ECW. So TNA was always my alternative, right? And rightfully so. You know, it's probably like the way a lot of people my age and maybe a bit younger look at AEW these days. That's probably like, you know, because that's their alternative now. AEW's the alternative product, you know, and it is, you know.
Yeah.
So the topic they were covering was TNA Lockdown 2010. Now, weird story. What I used to do around 2010, from like 2010 to 2012, what I used to have this DVD burner, right, connected to my Skybox.
Right.
And what I would do, I would put a DVD in the DVD burner and let the show play overnight. So by the time I woke up in the morning, I would wake up and have this show burned onto a DVD.
Jammy.
Yeah, right. So I would just I have like upstairs. I have a bunch of these sort of Raws and Smackdowns and Impacts and NXTs and all that stuff. Like all these shows that run around the time that I've got burned onto a DVD. You know, I have all this footage in a DVD. You know, upstairs. You know, so I'm very lucky that way and very fortunate to have all this footage. So the joy of TNA back in the day is that TNA's pay-per-views used to be on free TV over here. Lockdown 2010 was on Bravo one night, right? Which is the channel it was on. And I recorded it, I let it burn overnight. I woke up in the morning and I was like, yes, Lockdown 2010 on a DVD, get that saved, put it in the collection, you know? So I knew I had the DVD somewhere, right? So I thought I'll go and try and find the DVD, skim through the show, and then listen to the podcast with Eric and Conrad, right? So I went upstairs and I went and got the Lockdown DVD, right? And I was thinking, my God, this is finally paying off. All these years later, there's a reason why I've done it, you know? So I put the DVD in, the quality is all dodgy and stuff because it's kind of like from TV and it was all kind of dodgy, which I kind of liked, you know? Kind of added to it. And the opening match is RVD versus James Storm. So I'm watching the show, right? And about 50 minutes in, there's like this notification message comes up on the screen and it says Skybox going into standby. And I was like, all right, okay. So about 2 seconds later, Lockdown 2010 shuts off and it goes back to Disney Channel, which was on the TV at the time. And it was an episode of Lizzie McGuire that was just playing.
Oh, brilliant. We'll figure it out in the way, Lizzie McGuire.
So all these years later, sitting there, fast forwarding through Lizzie McGuire, the rest of the show, it's just recorded Disney Channel for the rest of the night. Oh,
brilliant.
disaster.
Oh, my God. And
disaster.
you've been sitting on that for 10 bloody years.
10 years, right? And not only that, I've been doing this every week at this point, right? So I think I've got all these Raws and Smackdowns and Impacts and NXTs recorded on DVD, but little do I know that it's probably all these episodes of fucking Corey in the House and That's So Raven from all these years.
Listen, Disney Plus is nothing on you. You've got their entire back catalogue.
No, exactly.
Pirated DVD.
I've got the whole library upstairs.
Oh my God. Isn't it funny how things go full circle? We're now living in Lockdown 2020 and Lizzie McGuire is being rebooted for Disney Plus. It was written in the sand, mate.
Oh, man. It's, you know, the way for 10 years I just thought I had Lockdown 2010. I was like, I've got this massive collection upstairs of all this wrestling. It turns out it's just all Disney Channel shows and adverts and stuff.
Here, listen, if you ever need to watch Steamboat Willie, then you're sorted.
No, I know. I didn't have that one. However, I did watch that on Disney Plus the other day, just for out of curiosity, you know.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is I subscribed to Impact Plus, the Impact Wrestling subscription service, right? Because I wanted to see Lockdown 2010. It piqued my interest, you know what I mean? I wanted to watch the show and listen to the podcast so I knew it was going on, you know?
Yeah.
So I wanted to do like a sort of 30-day free trial, but it turns out you can't do that. So I'm going to just try and watch whatever I can this month. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff on there. I recommend checking it out. So I checked out Lockdown 2010, really, really enjoyed the show. There's a really good match in there between Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
And it's an all-steel cage pay-per-view, obviously, Lockdown. So they have this great story, this great match. Kurt Angle does this moonsault off the top of the cage and he pretty much lands on his neck. It's ridiculous, obviously, his history of neck problems and that sort of thing. Crazy match.
Yeah, of course.
So I checked out that and then checked out the Bischoff podcast. So the only other thing, I did this thing a few years ago, was, I don't know why it was. I must have just watched like one match, right? So what I would do is it was like from 2008 sort of time, like kind of late Ruthless Aggression. It might actually been Great American Bash 2008 because I know Jericho and Michaels have that match where like he elbows him and Michaels is bleeding really bad and it's really kind of graphic and violent, and because of that they were like, okay, we can't have blood like this again. It kind of changed the business a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it was Great American Bash. I don't know.
Was it? Oh yeah.
It could be. I don't know because they were building to that big match in No Mercy, weren't they? That amazing ladder match they end up doing, but anyway, I was around that time anyway. So for some reason what I did was I finished one show and I moved straight on to the next one and straight on to the next one and I watched the individual stories progress over each pay-per-view, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really cool idea and I always wanted to go back to it, and of course the network's there's no excuse not to do it now, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all right in front of you. So I thought I'd start back and do it now. I started with Backlash 2007.
Okay.
And really, really interesting show, right after WrestleMania 23, obviously. And so, you know, MVP's on here. MVP wrestles Chris Benoit. And it's like a WrestleMania rematch. And I always loved MVP's theme song, right? I thought it was really underrated and that sort of thing. Did you know it goes... No, I thought it goes... I dropped the cannon, I'm on the loose. That's what I thought it went like, right?
The Baldwin theme. Yeah.
No, the one that goes, I'm coming,
Yeah, of course.
So I thought it was, drop the cannon, I'm on the loose, right? Turns out it's, I'm like, Tropicana, I got the juice.
No,
Did you know that?
no, it's not.
I'm like, Tropicana, I got the juice.
That's worse than John Cena's "I'll brush your mouth like Colgate."
Right? So I was like, that's not MVP's theme song. But it turns out it is.
Bloody hell! I feel like the Chris Jericho lyrics are mental as well.
Oh, they are weird, aren't they? It's like, well, it's baby, I'll be your Judas and your priest, which is ironic now because of Judas. I don't know. That is weird. So anyway, Undertaker and Batista are on that show in a last man standing match. That's a really good match. Taker does this spot as well where he puts Batista on the announce table and Undertaker walks on the barricade like Jeff Hardy and he leg drops Batista through the announce table and the table like explodes. Such a weird spot, like Taker doing this leg drop off the barricade. God, totally random.
Those guys had excellent chemistry.
They had really good matches, didn't they? Totally random, really good matches. The main event of that show was John Cena versus Shawn Michaels versus Randy Orton versus Edge in a fatal 4-way match. And I kind of had like a wee epiphany that the reason why multi-man matches are so popular and they're so much fun is because they're like a showcase of the top stars and the top talent of that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what I mean? Like the Survivor Series tag matches and stuff, it kind of like showcases the top stars around that time. There's always one every year. Whoever's the top stars or the top stars of the tag teams, the Intercontinental title or whatever. If you put on this match, you see the 4 people in this match, it's like they're the top 4 guys on Raw in 2007. So I really enjoyed that show. So I recommend checking that out. Check out Backlash 07 and Lockdown 2010. Sponsored by the Wrestling Connection.
And don't forget the Lizzie McGuire show available for streaming on Disney+.
Or from Chris's library. So that was my week in terms of watching wrestling. Another really weird week, but it kind of segues nicely into our first segment of the week, which is this, the match of the week.
Wrestling recommendations, wrestling recommendations, wrestling recommendations. Match of the week.
Oh, yeah. Okay, this week's match of the week is my recommendation is a match from April 23rd, 2007. 6 days before Backlash 2007, and it is on Monday Night Raw from London, England. From Earl's Court, so it's like a different kind of venue, a different setup. It kind of looks kind of, weird for a UK Raw show. The main event of that show is John Cena versus Shawn Michaels in a WrestleMania 23 main event rematch. It's a non-title match, and they wrestle for about 53 minutes.
Incredible.
And, we used 53 to kind of exaggerate things a lot, but I think genuinely it's about 53 minutes of this match. On this televised main event, which I kind of like as well because it's like they were kind of promoting the fact that Edge and Orton was still going to happen, but they didn't have time to get to it because Michaels and Cena ran on too long.
Excellent.
Which is dead funny. I remember at the time loving this match because I was such big fans of Michaels and Cena, but now being older, that I can kind of appreciate wrestling a bit more. You just kind of can see how much chemistry they have and how well they work together, and how much chemistry they have. Michaels is just drenched in sweat in this match. He's just exhausted. And there's like a slow pace to this match as if they're kind of building to something. So it kind of feels like a really big main event style match. And JR and King, they sell this match like mad. Like, this is such a classic we're watching. We're so lucky that we're here to see this match. When Michaels wins.
Of course.
Which is really unexpected because Cena never lost at that time. No one beat Cena. And it was non-title, so it was fine. And the finish comes out of nowhere. I love this finish. Do you remember this match?
I remember it really, really well. I was 16 when it happened, and I just kind of gone like we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about a wrestling story. I'd gone from being very childlike with my wrestling fandom to being quite insecure and inward, and this was when I was starting to come out my shell again with wrestling and really appreciating, not to take too much from Colt Cabana here, but I was really appreciating the art of wrestling, and this was a great example of that. It's funny because I've never been hugely into the Bret and Shawn 60-minute Ironman match, but this match for me, for a lot of the reasons you've outlined, really did it for me. Like, if a match is going to be long, there's that kind of je ne sais quoi that it needs to have. And I think it's a combination of the presentation, the venue, the way that JR and King build the match up and make it really feel like something special. And then the result, of course, was an excellent and unexpected result. So Yeah, that match was Chris Jericho credits that match as being
Yes.
his kind of trigger for wanting to
That's
come
right.
back in 2007.
I
I'm
believe he
pretty sure.
texted Sean and he was like, "That's what pro wrestling is all about," which
Yeah.
is really cool. And I love the fact this is on Raw. Do you know what I mean? Like the WrestleMania 23 match is awesome, but this is better and it's on Raw.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I like the idea, and you kind of talk about like best Raw matches of all time. This is always in the conversation. So if you're looking for something to watch this week, to all those wrestling fans out there, check this one out. Michaels and Cena, April 23rd, 2007, from Raw in London. Check it out. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's move on to what you're thankful for this week, my friend.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Cue jingle.
What I'm thankful for in wrestling this week.
Oh yeah.
So I gave a lot of thought to what I was thankful for this week. Because, like I said, when we first did this a couple of weeks ago, we live in a kind of a negative world, and in these times it can be hard to find positive things. And you'll know yourself, Chris, in the last few weeks in wrestling, we've had deaths, we've had people getting released from their job, all kinds of controversies, lawsuits. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you could look at and go, I am sick of wrestling right now. And so I thought, it's got to be, again, something quite personal. And I know this will mean something to you as well. This week, I'm thankful for replica belts.
All right. Nice.
So we're going to go back in time 20 years now. I'm 9 years old. And Kurt Angle actually just bet The Rock for the WWF Championship at No Mercy 2000.
Great match.
Which I was traumatized by.
Absolutely.
But I knew that on my Christmas list, I wanted the belt because whether The Rock held it or Angle held it, I loved that Attitude Era big belt with a big blue globe on it.
It's the best
Beautiful belt. Still my favorite, I think, of all time. And I asked for it for Christmas. I had a very, very lucky, very privileged upbringing. So in my kind of immature and kind of unsympathetic point of view, I kind of thought, there's a really good chance I'm going to get this belt for Christmas. I can't wait. And I did. But my poor mum, God bless her, of course, this was like pre-Amazon or anything like that. So she must have gone to every toy shop in Scotland, I think, and she eventually got me this beautiful foam replica of that belt. But it must have been one of the first foam belts that ever got put in the production line, because it's the blue Attitude Era title that Austin debuted the night after WrestleMania, but it is like that exact belt in that it has the WWF block logo on it, not the scratch logo.
Right, yeah.
So it's that kind of early version of it, and it's like, obviously it's like a foam one in plastic, and I was absolutely like besotted with this thing, and I would carry it everywhere. I wore it all day on Christmas Day. I used to just sit and stare at the blue globe for ages with it.
Nice.
And I took it to school. Eventually I was banned from taking it to school because it caused too many fights, too much conflict. Over the years, I would get other foam belts. I had an Intercontinental title, I had a tag team, I had a Smoking Skull, and my brother and I would fight over them, like play fight, kind of wrestle. We would practice moves on each other and stuff. And over time, that original foam WWF Championship got so scratched up that we had to turn it into the Hardcore Championship because we got so beaten up and so scratched. And then, for many years after that, when I grew older, I didn't have belts until I was given as a gift a spinner belt just around the time CM Punk was the WWE champion, and when he was having his year-long run with it. And so the spinner belt kind of felt more cool again.
Yeah.
And I've since sold that belt, but I keep coming full circle with this. And my oldest friend Robert, who I've mentioned a few times on the podcast,
shout out to Robert.
He's been my friend since we were in primary one. We've got so many wrestling memories together, some of which I'll maybe go on to mention later on this episode. We were once out at a bar playing pool, and he said, whoever wins this game of pool wins a long-standing bet that we had. The loser has to buy the other person replica tag team titles, but not the foam ones. I'm talking the expensive, proper replica ones with the metal plates.
Yeah.
The ones that cost you in the triple figures. And this was years ago. And I won that game of pool, which is a fluke because I'm terrible and Robert's actually pretty good at pool. And
Wow.
it's true. And Robert said, right, okay, you'll not know when it is, but one day I'm going to buy us replica tag team titles. We loved the Hardy Boys growing up. And then when they returned at WrestleMania in 2017 and won the Raw tag team titles with the beautiful kind of red ones that are still used to this day, it was a great moment for us. We felt really nostalgic. And about 6 or 7 months later, he came up to me and he was like, some people have friendship bracelets, we have friendship belts. And as I speak and as I record and talking to this microphone, Chris, I'm looking up at the top of my shelf and there sits my Raw tag team title, and I know that its companion is away at Robert's place, just a few miles away, and I won't get to see that physically in the flesh for a while, but it's a nice kind of friendship symbol. And of course, I enjoy whenever you go to like Inside the Rope shows or whatever, and you see somebody who's got a belt, and that way a belt's literally connecting you because you then got something to talk about, and they might have signatures in the belt. I know you've got a few signatures in your big gold belt, so it's belts are great. They're obviously a symbol of wrestling. Kids love them, adults love them. And they can connect people. They don't just connect trousers to your waist, folks. Belts can connect people, and that's what I'm grateful for this week.
It's not a belt, damn it. No, it's a beautiful story, man. I didn't know. I knew the story, but I didn't know it was like the game of pool and it was like this long-standing bet and that sort of thing. So that was really cool. I could just imagine Robert's face when you won the game.
He was raging. But I never actually thought he would go through with it. It must have cost him hundreds of quid to do this. I still feel guilty to this day.
Oh, there's no point in feeling guilty. Do you know what I mean? It's not as if you forced them to buy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
He didn't have to do it. He was just being a man of his word, which is why we respect Robert greatly on this show. No, I think that's a great shout for what you're thankful for this week. I love things like that, like replica belts and commemorative things from shows and that sort of thing. I had that Attitude Era one you were talking about, like the foam one with the block logo, which I totally forgot about. That was weird. Because it was only for like a short period of time. Like, that was the block logo before it changed to the scratch logo later in '98. But yeah, I wish I still had that. It was kind of like all faded and that sort of thing. But yeah, I love that one. I used that one a lot because we talked about backyard wrestling a lot a couple weeks ago. And because of that, I would always kind of use like the foam belts and that sort of thing as like the championship titles for my wrestling company out the back garden. So that was always fun, like kind of buying them for that. And like my friends had them and they would like donate theirs so we could use their belts and that sort of thing for the show, you know. So that was a lot of fun. But in terms of actually like the replica, like the big heavy one, like a leather belt, in 2010, I managed to talk my parents into getting me one for my birthday. I have no idea how I managed to talk them into it. I must have just begged them and begged them and begged them. And they got me the big gold belt, the World Heavyweight Championship in 2010. I had like kind of like the red rubies like around the side of it and stuff like that. It was just so just mesmerising getting that big box and opening it, and it came in like the cool sort of black case with the WWE logo on the front, and then just like unboxing it and stuff and taking out the case. Such a beautiful moment. I still have it in my room, and yes, I have it signed by a few people. I have it signed by Jeff Hardy, who I met in 2011 at the TNA show, which was tripping. I'll tell that story somewhere down the line. I also have it signed by John Morrison, funnily enough, because I met him in April of 2011, and at the time I was like, oh, he's definitely going to be a future world champion, brother.
Yeah.
So he was released a few months later, but now he's back, so hopefully maybe one day he'll get like the Universal title or something. And I also have it shined by Sheamus. Signed by Sheamus.
No, just imagine you showing up with some wax. You know, here you go, fella.
Sheamus, mate, go do the favour.
Shine that up for me.
No. Signed by Sheamus, not shined. Not shined by Sheamus. That would have been funny. But that was cool because at the time when I met him in April of 2012, he was the world champion in real life, you know. So he brought his world title. It was on the table, and then I had my replica, and he was like, "It's the same size as the real one, fella." So that was really, really cool. So yeah, replica belts, big up to that one. Good shout. And I think that's a very beautiful thing to be thankful for. Love it. This week is going to be a little bit different, actually. So the past few podcasts, we've talked about kind of like our favourite moments, our favourite matches, you know, that sort of thing. What we love about wrestling and all that stuff over the past couple of weeks. And this week, we're going to go a little bit more personal. We're going to talk about a sort of subject that kind of connects everybody, you know, in terms of being wrestling fans, and that is going to see the wrestling live, going to an arena, going to a small venue, going to a stadium, whatever it may be, to see wrestling live and in person. There's nothing that quite beats live wrestling, no matter, you know, the day, the time of the year. you know, what card it is, who's there, what the company is. It doesn't matter. There's something special about walking in the very first time and seeing the ring and seeing the stage and seeing the whole crowd and that sort of thing. So Glenn and I have been to a bunch. We've got plenty to talk about between us, so we're going to just tell some of our favourite stories, our favourite memories and experiences whilst being at Wrestling Live. In terms of doing the prep for this episode, I found it so hard. It took me ages. It took me ages to put together these match cards and that sort of thing. How was it for you in terms of finding the research and doing the research and finding the cards of shows you've attended in the past?
It's similar. It took me a while to put it all together. My phone was like hot. Like by the time I'd like screenshot match cards and taken down notes of things, and again, talk about being fortunate. I've been to see like the WWE alone so many times that it was hard to place like what date, what year it was I saw this. But as I hope we'll get into, there's other shows that I've been to which are memorable for other reasons, and I'm looking forward to this one, Chris. We'll see how much we actually get to discuss. I don't think there's any hope in hell that we'll get to discuss every show we've ever been to.
No way, man.
But let's see what happens. This will be interesting.
Well, my first show was in 2002, which is a while ago now. But you were a bit earlier than me. I think you were the year before. You were 2001. What was your first experience at a live wrestling show? You can tell us.
It started quite big. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in episode 1. My first show was the UK only exclusive pay-per-view Rebellion 2001 on Saturday, the 3rd of November, 2001, of course.
Can I just stop you right there? I'm sorry. Imagine this is your first ever show, right? All the listeners out there, you know, this is Glenn's first ever wrestling experience. A live UK exclusive WWE pay-per-view where the main event is The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. You are so lucky, my friend.
I still to this day feel really fortunate, and like for anybody of any age that would be a big deal, but I was 10. Like I was I lived and breathed wrestling at this point.
Jesus, man.
You mentioned that feeling of walking into an arena for the first time. And for me, I don't care if you're at the Hydro or a big stadium or you're at the garage going to see ICW. That feeling's always there, seeing the ring as you walk into the venue. Big or small, it's always a little adrenaline rush for me. But 10-year-old Glenn walking into the Evening News Arena, that it was insane for a few reasons. I remember walking into, it's just called the Manchester Arena now, I think, but back then it was the Evening News Arena, and I remember walking in and we were in the kind of like lobby bit and seeing two guys who not only were cosplaying as the Dudley Boys, but they were carrying a table.
What?
And I just think that just shows you, like, even though that this was only about, you know, like less than 2 months after 9/11, the security hadn't quite tightened up yet, and you could, because nowadays you can't like bring a bottle of water in, and quite rightly so. I mean, security is important at these things, and obviously the Manchester Arena has since had that tragedy in 2017.
Oh my God.
So, but back then, you could take your own table if you wanted.
Just a table, a full-on table. Yeah.
So these two, I don't know if they were actually able to take it into the show, but they were in the lobby with 2 pints of beer, like carrying this table. I wonder if there's any chance that those guys are listening. They had get in touch, please, because like I know it was nearly 20 years ago, but like they had it down to a T, to the camo. It was like proper the Dudley's 2001 era gear, and then we walked in.
Imagine you were the people sitting next to them in their seats. Now they'd be like when you've got like an empty seat next to you, you're thinking, oh, I hope this person's all right. Do you know what I mean? And then just walk in carrying a wooden table.
I'd like to think they put the table up and just laid out some crisps for people.
Yeah,
you know,
just gonna put your feet up and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I remember not really understanding how big venues worked because I'd never been to a concert before this or anything like that. So I didn't know how arenas worked. I'd only seen them on like WWF programming. I remember I was walking in and going through the doors, and then Robert's dad saying, right, go all the way down. Oh, are you kidding me? I thought we were way up the back. These are WWF tickets. There's no way we're close to the front, but we're on the floor. So we went all the way down, and it's hard to, we were on the same side as the hard camera, but just slightly to the left, so kind of between the ring and the Titantron.
Nice.
But at the bottom of the ramp, so more close to the ring side. Like if I could see the venue now, I could point it out. If I was in the Manchester Evening News or the Manchester Arena now, I could take you to the exact seat that we sat at, I'm sure. And I remember that feeling of when we walked in, like there was the ring, the set, which was the Raw is War set.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Rebellion theme,
That's right. Was it not used as like Luke Gallows' theme song or something?
It may have been, yeah. I think that's been recycled a few times.
Yeah.
And that was playing. And I remember, like, mobile phones were quite new at that point, but Robert's dad got a phone call from Robert's mum, and she was primarily there to speak to Robert and his brother. But I spoke to her as well, and I just remember her saying, "How do you feel?" And I just looked up, and I looked at the ring, and I just said, wow. I had no words for it.
Yeah.
And of course, like, you know, the show, I actually think, having recently watched it objectively, like on paper, compared to everything else they put out in 2001, it's nowhere near the best show. Like, it's not,
they never were though.
Not
those
a brilliant
UK
show
shows
by any stretch.
You know what I mean?
But it will always hold a special place in my heart. Everything from like the dark match, which was Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo, not Billy and Chuck. They weren't Billy and Chuck yet. They were just Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo.
Gunn and Palumbo.
Yeah. Versus the Impact players from ECW, Justin Credible and Lance Storm.
Oh, nice.
And then the pay-per-view starts. JR came out before the show started and cut a promo. It was kind of a very triumphant kind of how proud he was to have made the journey across the pond, because it was the first big international flight they'd done since 9/11.
Right.
Because again, this is November 3rd, 2001. It's under 2 months since that terrible event.
Jesus.
And so like that got the crowd kind of rallied up and weirdly American patriotic for a Manchester crowd.
USA.
And the show kicked off, and I'm not going to break down the entire card because we'd be here all night. But one memory that really stands out was when the first match started and the entrances kicked off. The first match, for anyone who's not seen Rebellion 2001, was a cage match between Edge and Christian, which has to this day my favorite finish to a cage match ever, which I was so happy that
Absolutely.
I think it was Wolfgang and BT Gunn did the same finish a few years ago in ICW. It was great to see it being done again. But like, I remember when Edge was coming out, like he had the first entrance when the broadcast has started. And I just remember Robert tapping me and I looking at him, and he just said, "That's the real Edge." I was like, "Holy God, he's right."
Nice.
And I'm sure over the I hope we can do this podcast for a lot longer, over a long period of time, and I'm sure I'll have other stories to tell. But just so that this isn't the Glenn show, there's lots of stories I could tell about that show. Go and watch on the network. It's a lot of fun, and that's how I kicked it off. And as at some point later on in the pod I'll get to, I went from a bang to a whimper with my wrestling live shows after that. But that was chronologically the first one that I went to, and then of course you weren't too long after me.
I wasn't too far away from that, no. But honestly, Rebellion 2001 is, as you say, it's not the greatest show, but none of the UK shows were around that time.
No.
Insurrection, that sort of thing. They were like glorified house shows for Sky Box Office.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But that show is one of the very first ones I ever bought on VHS. And I kind of mentioned this in episode 1 when we were talking about early wrestling memories, that sort of thing. I don't know. I just love that show. I love the way it looks. I love the way it sounds. I love the opening match with Edge and Christian. And Jericho and Angle have a really good match on that show. And there's this promo backstage. It's like a sort of round table promo, and it's like lit with one light bulb.
Yes.
It's like a strategy meeting between Austin and Vince, and I think Angle as well. It's like full of nostalgia for me, that one segment. So when is it they actually told me that you were at that show? Because I must have gone mental when you told me.
Do you know what? The day we first met nearly 8 years ago, I might have told you then because we had a lot of time to talk.
Yeah, it might have been. It might have been just like talking about other shows that we'd been to and that sort of thing. I don't know. Probably. Well, I had a bunch of time. Anyway, in terms of, you mentioned walking in and seeing the ring for the first time. One of the last days before the quarantine and the isolation and the lockdown and all that thing, Glenn and I actually attended a show together at the Glasgow Pavilion. It was the family-friendly shows one of the family-friendly shows that Grado has been producing. And it was so much fun. We kind of talked about it then, walking into the theatre and seeing the ring and that sort of venue and that sort of thing. It was still giving us that buzz. I don't know what it is. I don't know, what it is about seeing the ring for the first time.
Yeah.
It's just, I can't really describe it. It's a beautiful feeling.
It's something that's built into being a wrestling fan, and all these examples we talk about. There's just not been a wrestling show, big or small, where I haven't had that.
Yeah, totally. I feel like though when I go to the theatre and stuff and like concerts and that sort of thing, I still get that feeling, but it's not quite as special and it's not quite as big, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not quite as special as going to the wrestling. My first show was May 2, 2002, and it was at the SECC in Glasgow, and back then that was like the venue. Everything was held there, whether it be a concert or other like sporting venues and that sort of sporting events and that sort of thing. It was always there. And I wrote down the match card, and I'm going to read out this match card here, and just thinking about the people that I've seen on this show. And you know, there's something about going to a show and seeing someone, you know, more than like the matches itself. You kind of want to go and see the person. You know, I've always said I wanted to go see Brock Lesnar, but he was second on this show. Do you know what I mean? So it's not so much, you know, like when you're selling a main event like it used to be. It's more like the attraction now, you know, going to see a certain wrestler or whatever. So on this show, the opener was RVD versus X-Pac. We had Jerry Lawler and Jackie versus Mr. Perfect and Molly Holly.
I had no idea that Jerry Lawler wrestled on this show.
Yep, he and Mr. Perfect in the same match.
Wow.
We had Brock Lesnar versus Matt Hardy before he was broken. This could have been the start of the descent. We had a hardcore fatal 4-way, which was Sean Stasiak versus Justin Credible versus Stevie Richards versus Crash Holly.
Brilliant. That's funny because at that time, the only person who was consistently on telly was Sean Stasiak out of that lineup.
That's right, Planet Stasiak.
Yep.
Disaster. This really sticks in my head. There was lots of run-ins and, you know, lots of weapons, and it was the 24/7 rule. The title changed hands a bunch of times. A lot of fun. Then we had Jazz versus Trish Stratus, which was cool. Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Big Show, which blows my mind, the fact I saw Austin.
Incredible.
You know?
Just in time before he retired the following year.
That's right.
Just before he walked out.
Yeah.
Literally
I just read that chapter under the black hat.
It was literally just after that tour that he went.
That's right. Yeah, because he was doing that stuff with like Big Show and Ric Flair around Judgment Day.
Yeah.
He was actually meant to feud with Eddie Guerrero. Did you know that? Like, you'll see this when you come up to it in the Raw shows in 2002. But he starts planting seeds for a feud against Eddie Guerrero,
right,
and the matches they could have had where they just had, they would have been amazing.
God.
Eddie had the match with the Rock on Raw, which is brilliant. You know, Eddie Guerrero.
Classic.
Anyway. We also had Tommy Dreamer and Spike Dudley versus Booker T and Goldust. Dreamer and Spike actually won this match.
Wow.
We had Eddie Guerrero versus Jeff Hardy for the Intercontinental title, another mental match. Scott Hall versus Bradshaw, because Bradshaw was on that big push at the time.
That's right, yeah.
And in the main event, we had Triple H and Ric Flair versus The Undertaker and William Regal.
Amazing.
Just a mental show. And the things I remember the most about this match, about the show, was the loud music, the not being able to see a lot of stuff, you know, because of my seats, I had floor seats, had to stand on my dad's shoulders, and he was standing on a chair. The security guard kept telling us to sit down. You know, what else do I remember? Buying the Hulk Still Rules t-shirt. A bunch of us in our group bought that t-shirt. The hardcore fatal 4-way, and just seeing Triple H and The Undertaker and that sort of thing, and just being like, yeah, probably the same as what you did, you know, but saying to my dad, this is the real Undertaker. Do you know what I mean? And the real Triple H. And the fact the answer was yes to that question is absolutely mental. So started off with a bang, and it was a big one for sure.
Well, this is the thing, because you asked that question, is this the real Undertaker? Now, if I had asked my dad that question at the next wrestling show I attended, the answer would be no. And if you don't mind, Chris, I'd like to talk about the second wrestling show that I ever attended.
Yes, please do.
Now, if there's anyone listening to this who has a similar experience of this type of show, please get in touch. I've been researching these shows online for like 24 hours now. I've become a little bit obsessed. If you're a wrestling fan of a certain age, you will remember that in the late 90s into the early 2000s, there would be a series of shows that would tour the entire of the UK, and they were WWF/WCW tribute shows where local, rather pasty and weedy talent would just imitate the big names. So there would be a fake Steve Austin, a fake Undertaker, a fake anyone you can imagine. And I was
Fake
reading
Kane.
about these shows recently, and I read that Paige's dad, Ricky Knight, was the fake Road Warrior Animal, which is incredible.
It's brilliant. Of course he was.
Which I had no idea. So in, I think it was October or November of 2003, it would have been, I went to a show at, get this, so I went from the Rebellion 2001 at the Manchester Evening News Arena, thousands of people. I went to Mulgai Town Hall for,
yes.
I can't even remember what it was called. It was like American Wrestling Tribute Show. Now, full disclosure, I was 12, going in there with my wee cousin and my dad. I knew immediately, like before, like when we bought the tickets, because I bought them out of a public library. I knew that it wasn't a WWF show. Like I knew it was a tribute show, but I thought it's live wrestling. It'll be fun. I want to go. Like I'm never going to get to see the WWF again. So I thought, so this is important. And I got in there, and everything I've read about these shows since then speaks quite disparagingly about how they were promoted and how it was a total carny kind of rip-off thing. And it was so depressing. It was like, you know, the opening of the film The Wrestler, where he's wrestling all these rundown tacky shows.
Yeah. Totally.
It was like that. It was a tacky ring which had like the turnbuckles were like a boxing ring with like the full pads.
So like New Japan.
And yeah, like that, but not in a glamorous kind of way.
Yeah.
And there was a guy, that really dodgy guy, selling raffle tickets, going around the ring and around the 4 or 5 rows of seats, going raffle tickets. There was a merch stand that sold old magazines and replica belts and just loose action figures, you know,
from people's collections.
And then we sat down, and the show would start. The first match, I can't remember who he faced, but it was fake Rikishi versus somebody, right? And the fake Rikishi was just
Rikishi.
this. Yeah, oh my god, it was just this big white guy, this big fat white guy, who wore the thong, but he wouldn't take his top off, so he had a red t-shirt on.
Right.
But he did the dancing to the music and stuff,
Of course.
and he'd fight whoever it was. And there was a comparer who would stand in the corner on a microphone, and he would announce the matches on the microphone, and he would get everyone to chant. And so it was like total pantomime. He would go, and he didn't know the guy. He would call him Rakishi instead of Rikishi, in the same way that JR used to, but not. You know, so he'd go,
that's right.
Rakishi, and you'd all have to chant along. The same guy played Rikishi doubled up as Mick Foley later on in the show, like during the Battle Royal.
Of course he did.
And you know how Mankind used to kind of do these kind of like head turns and stuff. Like he came out to the ring again as Mankind later on, and he like a wee shaky kind of confident guy sat next to me, that looked him dead in the eye as he walked past and went, "All right, Rikishi," and he just sort of ignored him and turned away. Fake Undertaker was there. Fake Rey Mysterio wasn't too bad. He could do a good 619, and there was a Rumble match to end the night. But one of my highlights was seeing the Dudley Boy. Not the Dudley Boys. The Dudley Boy. Why not just call him Bubba Ray? Because it was clearly supposed to be Bubba Ray Dudley. They just called him the Dudley Boy. The chanting was so forced and robotic. It was like in the WWE Warzone game where the crowd would go, player one. It was like that. And at the end, they said, at the end of the show, if you want a photograph with Rey Mysterio and Undertaker, it's £5 to go in the ring. And I was the first one to go up. I said, Dad, can I get it? And I still have that Polaroid to this day. Maybe we'll post it on the Instagram, Chris.
Yeah, we have to. Oh my God. The Dudley
when
Boy.
this episode lands, we'll send it out because I paid £5. I got into the ring, and it was mainly, I didn't really want the picture of them. I just wanted to say that I'd been in a ring.
Yeah, totally.
So I got in there, and this guy, this Undertaker, kind of puts his hand around my neck, and the Rey Mysterio kind of flexes his bicep, and we take a picture, and some wee guy in the audience went "Loner" at me as I was in the ring, and I was really embarrassed. But then after that, a bunch of kids would do it, so I started it, Chris. So that was a not so glamorous show, and it was a thing. Robert went to one as well, where like the guy who played Stone Cold looked like Kid Fight, from ICW.
Ah, yeah, of course.
So, like, please, if anyone has been to any of those shows back in the day, they're horrible, but get in touch, please do.
Oh my God, that was real tears. I'm really laughing there. That was so funny. The
Dudley
Dudley
Boy. And I didn't win the raffle either.
Oh, no, of course. If you want a photograph with Rey Mysterio and The Undertaker, why don't you come into the ring? Oh my god, that was hilarious. I'd never been to one of those shows. Unfortunately never went to one. I would have loved it. But I've heard Grado talk about them before. He's kind of mentioned Bubba Ray Dudley, but he never mentioned he was called the Dudley Boy.
The Dudley Boy, yeah.
That's excellent. No, I really, really wish I could go back in time and go to one of those shows. But you know the way it's always like a myth. I'd heard about it, but I'd never actually seen it. You know, so now that you're a living proof and a living witness, the fact that you were there, that's brilliant. It made me laugh a lot.
Yeah, there was something else. I would never want to relive it, but I'm kind of perversely glad I've got the memory.
Okay, so my second show, luckily, was also a WWE show, and it was the WrestleMania Revenge Tour. It was on March 21st, 2004.
Okay.
And it was a SmackDown show. It was at the Braehead Arena. It was my first time at the Braehead Arena. I was with my mum, my dad, and my cousin. This was around the sort of time we were all still into wrestling and all kind of wanted to go to the show and that sort of thing. Not quite as much as before, but still, I mean, 2004, still around that time, you know, I was still really young and we still kind of wanted to go to the shows together and that sort of thing. So it was my mum, my dad, and my cousin. So we all went to Braehead Arena for this particular show. And I remember walking into the arena for the first time, and you know the way I knew I was going to the wrestling, I knew it was going to be WWE and that sort of thing. But when I sat down in my seat and I saw the ring and I saw the stage and the big crowd and that sort of thing, I was a bit kind of... Because remember, at the SECC back in 2002, it was all floor seats, so I didn't have a very good view. You know, I didn't really understand what was going on, really. At this show, I was up in the tiers, I had really good seats, and I could kind of see everything. And I sat down and I looked about and I burst into tears.
Oh no!
Before the show even started, like 20 minutes, a good 20 minutes before the show even started, right? I just started crying. My dad was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, I don't know. I didn't understand what was going on. Maybe I was just excited or I was just happy to be there. I just couldn't believe I was there, right? So I just was in tears. My tummy was going, you know, mental, was doing somersaults. My dad was like, what do you want me to do? And I was like, I don't know. I was just happy to be there. So anyway, luckily my cousin was there and he kind of turned to me and he was like, do you want to go a walk or something? And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. So we left our seats and we went up to the kind of concession bit. I was a mess. We went over to look at the t-shirts and the merch and all that stuff, and I was shaking. I guess I was just excited and happy. I don't know. I was just so prepared to be at that show. And he bought me a juice. And we walked back down the stairs and we kind of went down to the floor sort of bit. So our seats were further up, but, you know, we kind of just went to walk down the barricade or whatever. But I remember looking up at my seats and seeing my mum and dad waving at me and seeing if I was okay. And I was like, yeah, fine, hi. So it was all a bit too much for me. So we did a full lap of, like, the barricades on the ground floor. And I think at that moment, I became, like, connected to, like, live wrestling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because every time I go to the sort of Braehead Arena and even Braehead itself, you know, we actually don't need to go there anymore because in 2014 there was a brand new venue, an arena built in Glasgow called the Hydro, and that's where they do all the concerts and all the sporting events and the wrestling and all that sort of stuff. Now we don't even need to go to the Braehead Arena anymore, but sometimes now when I go to Braehead and I go to that kind of area, I kind of go down there and I kind of still get that feeling.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of like the way it smells and the way it sounds and the acoustics of the whole venue and that sort of thing. I still kind of get that kind of feeling, which I think is quite nice. You know, it's very nostalgic of me. You know, last year actually in 2019 we went to the NXT UK TV tapings and I did the exact same thing. I was with two of my mates and I left them to go get another drink, and when I came back down for my drink before I went back to my seat, I did a full lap of the barricade, you know, like I did on that day in 2004, and I was like, yep, the feeling's still there. I still get that kind of feeling of being at a live show and being so close to it and that sort of thing. So that was a funny story. The main event of that show was Eddie Guerrero versus The Big Show.
Wow.
And it was right after WrestleMania 20. Undertaker had just come back, right, at WrestleMania 20. And I remember I bought the program at this show. And you know how, like, in the programs, it has, like, the sort of profiles of the wrestlers. It's, like, pictures and details of their career and, like, their finisher and that sort of thing. So when it came to Undertaker's page, it was just the Undertaker symbol, right? Because he was transitioning between American Badass to Deadman. And they didn't have a picture of him yet. So they just put the Undertaker symbol in the program, and I remember saying to my dad, like, why is the Undertaker not in the program? But obviously the program was made probably before WrestleMania, you know what I mean? They didn't have a picture of him. Other on that show, we had the real Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty versus the Basham Brothers, John Cena versus Rhino, Jamie Noble versus Nydia in a blindfold match.
Wow, they did that on TV, I'm pretty sure, on a SmackDown.
Yeah, they did. And you know, it was really, really good because both those guys were so entertaining.
Yeah. Jamie Doe was hilarious. Like that, he was a real underrated talent.
Yeah. Come on, Seth. Let's go, Seth.
Oh, God.
Anyway, sorry. Anyway, go. You give me one.
Right, so like, there's a few I could talk from, but I think we need to kind of concede that we'll jump back and forth a bit in time, because I think I'll make a bit of a jump here, because I did go to, like, my next show after the one I just spoke about was a Raw House show in 2007. That one had main evented by Jeff Hardy and Triple H versus Randy Orton and Umaga.
Nice.
I was at a SmackDown in ECW in April 2008. Which was Batista, Matt Hardy, and The Undertaker versus Edge, Mark Henry, and MVP. And so that was also an excellent show. After that show, my now sadly passed away great Auntie Avril was going on holiday, and she was at like 6 a.m. the following day after this show, and she was at Glasgow Airport when all the wrestlers were coming through the airport. And she just saw all these big guys plus one really small guy, Hornswoggle, and my Auntie Avril was one of those great kind of Scottish women of that generation who just was like no nonsense, wasn't impressed by anything, and had no problem going up to tired wrestlers at 6 a.m. So she took this kind of leaflet about how to prepare for security, like in the airport, and marched right up to any wrestler that didn't have headphones on and goes, "Here, you'll know my son. You'll know my nephew. He was at the show last night. You'll have seen him." I think in her mind it was like Mulgai Town Hall again, not the Braehead Arena.
Yeah.
And she's like, "So you got to sign this for it." And so then I all I knew for a couple of weeks was that Auntie Avril claimed to have met wrestlers, and had got me some autographs. I was like, "Oh my God!" So I got the autographs back when she came back. And the piece of paper is signed by Hornswoggle, who drew a wee clover, MVP, nice. Matt Hardy, and there's a fourth signature on it, which to this day I can't identify. That might be something I put on the Instagram one day as well, Chris, because I need help identifying it. I remember WWE.com did an auction for a steel chair from Survivor Series 2007, the poster with Edge and the chainsaw.
Yeah.
And that signature was on that chair. So it was somebody who was on the roster. I don't know if it was a referee or if it was a talent, but I can't tell. I'll send you a DM of the picture as well, Chris. Maybe you can help me with it.
Yeah, please do. I'm quite good at that sort of thing, so I might be able to help you out, but no promises.
So it was somebody who'd have been touring with them at that time. Who it was, I don't know. So that's the only thing that came out of that show. But the one main show that I'd like to kind of skip to, and I'm also skipping past Raw November 2008, which you were at, where Shawn wrestled JBL.
Yep.
Unless you want to talk about that show,
the only thing from that show I remember very vividly is I remember doing that sort of bow thing, that we are not worthy bow thing to Shawn Michaels after he beat JBL. And I remember him coming to the top rope and kind of pointing at us and waving, and I thought that was cool that Shawn Michaels waved us. But the main event of that show is Batista and Rey Mysterio versus Orton and Jericho. What a main event that is!
What a match! I managed to give Randy Orton and Batista kind of a back pat on their sweaty backs afterwards. So I've had Drax's sweat in my hands, folks.
There you go. You had really close seats for that one?
Yeah, we were on the floor for that one. Pretty good, like
nice.
4th or 5th row, I think. So, like at the end, we could just kind of wiggle around down to the front and try and get some high fives off some of the wrestlers.
The only other thing from that show that I remember is that I was in like a sort of big group. My dad took me and a few of my friends, right? And my friend Mark, who wasn't so much a big wrestling fan then, but was when he was younger, he had never heard Kofi Kingston's theme song before.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember after the show, we were going down the escalators back to the car, and he couldn't stop singing Kofi Kingston's theme song. He thought it was dead funny. I don't know why. He kept singing, "You lose alive," when he was coming down the escalators.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I remember getting home from the show that night, putting on the telly and seeing Kofi Kingston on the BBC Scotland portion of Children in Need that night. Right. He went straight from the Braehead Arena to the STV or the BBC studios in Glasgow. So that was a good show. I met Rey Mysterio that day. That's something I'll talk about, I guess, when we do our Meet a Wrestler segment in the weeks to come. Cool. I'm jealous that you had a positive interaction with Shawn Michaels, because, when we talk about that Meet a Wrestler segment, most of the wrestlers that I've met that I'll talk about in the weeks to come have been symptomatic of my standing as being an absolute social disaster, and most of my interactions with wrestlers have been very embarrassing. So I'll not give too much away now, but I will say this: my interaction with Shawn Michaels is one of the most embarrassing moments of my life.
Excellent.
So We'll get to that one day.
I look forward to
But
it.
I wanted to jump to 2012, the day I met you, Chris. The Raw show on the 6th of November 2012 at the Braehead Arena. And of course, as we spoke about last week, we met Daniel Bryan and Kane that day.
Yep.
But you didn't go to the show afterwards, but my friend Callum and I did. And that was a good show. A lot of good matches. Santino and Brodus Clay beat Primo and Epico.
Classic.
Michael McGillicuddy pre-Curtis Axel beat Tensai. The match that stole the show was John Cena and Dolph Ziggler. They
cool.
went for about 20 minutes, and it was a great, fantastic match.
They had great chemistry.
And Cesaro beat Zack Ryder. Team Hell No beat the Rhodes Scholars, Cody and Damien Sandow.
Nice.
But the story I want to share with this match was the main event, CM Punk versus Ryback.
Feed me.
Feed me more indeed. So my friend Callum, who I was with, I don't really talk to Callum anymore. It's a shame, but Callum loves, I'm sure he still does, he certainly loved wrestling at the time, but he had this thing where he hated talking about it as if it wasn't a legit sport. It was just this thing that he had as a fan. He needed to talk about it as if it was real. So just to give you an example, when Brock Lesnar quit after the John Cena match, Extreme Rules 2012, or after the Triple H match at SummerSlam 2012, I texted him saying, when do you think they'll bring him back for another match? And Callum texted me back going, never. He said he was done.
Right.
But that's the storyline. When do you think he's actually coming back? So it's like he couldn't do it. And so a part of that meant that, and I'm always a big believer in this, he always cheered the baby faces and booed the heels.
Yeah.
And I still believe that. I still think you should do that. I love that, doing that at wrestling shows. But I will say in 2012, it was hard to do that because, I love Punk. And even though he was bad guy Punk at this point, he was still so cool. So I was kind of win-win. I was into Ryback, but I was a big Punk fan. So we were in the second row for that show, second row opposite the entrance. And so we had a bunch of cool interactions with wrestlers that night. Callum is a loud guy. And so Punk made his entrance, right? After, I think Ryback came out first, and then Punk made his entrance with Heyman. And Callum was belting it out. And now Callum was a big guy, and he was wearing a big bright green John Cena t-shirt, okay?
Lovely.
Like that kind of green one that he had at the time.
Yeah.
And Callum is giving it, feed me more. And he's screaming this all the way through Punk's entrance, screaming it non-stop. The guy had an endless battery. And Punk is circling the ring in his yellow go-to-sleep t-shirt.
Yeah, that's right.
And Punk locks onto Callum. And right in front of us in the first row were some wee kids, so he would see over them pretty easily to us who are kind of tall guys. And Punk locks onto Callum, and he walks right up to us. And he looks him up and down, and Heyman's up next to him, giving it with a big cheeser on his face, because I think Heyman knows where he's going. And Cam's going, feed me more. And Punk says, hey, man, looking at you, I don't think we need to feed you anything else.
Boom.
And
Nice.
he just gets into the ring. And I was just shocked. And then Callum's giving him smack talk back, and I'm shocked. And then I'm texting Jamie, shaking, going, Callum is having a bad words with CM Punk. And this went on throughout the match. Yeah,
brilliant.
So Punk cuts this promo during the match saying it's great to be back here in Dublin, just to kind of get heel heat, right?
Excellent, yeah.
And so, during the match, Callum would shout, Chicago sucks! And Punk would go, Dublin sucks! Which didn't make a lot of sense. And then at one point, Punk got knocked off his feet by Ryback, and Callum shouted the Ryback, stupid! And then Punk just nipped up like Shawn Michaels, walked right to the ropes and went, fat! And pointed at Callum. So this went on throughout the entire night, and so that's one of my favorite memories from that show, was my mate getting into an argument with CM Punk.
I don't have anything like that, but in terms of being really, really close, I sat front row one time in April of 2013. Somehow Sky were giving away front row tickets. Don't ask me how, I have no idea how. What? You'd imagine if they were giving away tickets, it would be the bleachers or whatever, or the nosebleed seats, whatever. I don't know. Front row seats. And it was me and my mate Evan, who I don't speak to much now, which is a shame, but we were good pals at the time. We did YouTube videos and stuff together. But it was April 18th, 2013. It was a SmackDown show. And we were front row in the Braehead Arena. The main event was The Shield versus Sheamus and the New Age Outlaws.
fantastic.
Let that sink in. That's the most mental main event ever, right? So not only were we front row when Ambrose, Reigns and Rollins did the entrance, like, and they walked past us, like walking down from the sort of like the concession bit, like through the crowd, that sort of thing, the classic Shield entrance. So they walked past us, hopped the barrier, but then the Outlaws came out and they did the ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages.
Excellent.
And it was amazing. And we were touching them all after, touch all their sweaty backs, and I touched Sheamus's sweaty back. It was lovely. Also on that show was Randy Orton versus The Big Show, and I couldn't believe how big they were, right? I knew they were all massive, right? But Orton did this thing where he drop-kicked the Big Show out the ring, and Big Show kind of like went into the barricade or whatever where we were. And I just remember sitting there going, I can't believe, I've never seen anybody this size in my life. The Big Show was just huge. And I'm a tall guy, right? Even back then, obviously I was a bit shorter, but still, like, I couldn't believe how big the Big Show was, and even Orton was. So that was a lot of fun. That's a good memory. Another one that's really, really special to me was in 2008, and it was August 11th, 2008. And I was on holiday at the time with my mum and my dad and my sister. We didn't leave her behind. We were in Orlando. We went to Florida in 2008. And this day we went to Discovery Cove. And we met the dolphins, swam with dolphins, took pictures with dolphins and all that stuff. And after, we were going to Universal Studios. And I was so excited because I wanted to see the roller coasters and see all the big attractions that I was always told about, because it was like, you know, the world famous Universal Studios. I was just so excited. So we got there and my dad was like, right, you come with me, Chris, and Rachel and your mum can go and do their own thing. And I was like, what? Why are we separating? This is so random. So my dad was like, no, it's fine, just I want to go and do something. So we get over to this kind of like grey wall, right? And we're standing in a queue. And I was like, this is not, I want to go on a roller coaster.
By the way, if you're going with this story where I think you're going, I'm annoyed that you've never told me this.
Right? So we're standing in this queue, right? And I was just like asking all these questions. I was like, where are we? Why are we waiting here? Where's mum? Where's my sister? But of course, I'm just following my parents' orders. You know what I mean? We could be doing something involving tickets, or we could have been doing something involving the house or whatever. Anyway, the queue started going down, right? And this woman came out with a megaphone and she was like, live wrestling, come see live wrestling. It'll be on Spike TV or whatever she was saying, right? And I was like, she was trying to get like audience members to the show. So as the queue was going down, we went into the sort of TV studio and it was the feckin' Impact Zone.
Shut the front door. You have never told me this.
We walked into the Impact Zone, right? Because in Orlando back then, I don't know if they still do it for the Impact tapings nowadays, I doubt it, but the Impact tapings were free. And what they would do is they would try and get like the theme park goers into the studio to be the audience for Impact. So like whenever they were taping the shows, it would just be like filled with wrestling fans. And it would be like this big sort of queue round the kind of side of the soundstage. But if anyone's ever been to Universal Studios, you kind of recognise the bit I mean. It's like this sort of grey, kind of dark yellow, kind of weird wall. And it's like the soundstage area. You see it on that, like backstage moments of Impact, like for all the years, you know what I mean? So that was there. We stood in there. We got into the Impact Zone. The main event was Kurt Angle versus AJ Styles. And it was like, Angle was doing this thing where it was like, he was trying to prove he was the best pure wrestler in the world. So what they did was, it was like a takedown challenge between him and AJ. So it was the six-sided ring, right? And they took out all the ropes and they made like a sort of collegiate Olympic wrestling kind of stage thing. And Angle and AJ were doing these sort of takedowns, and I was raging because they were taping the following week's show the next day, and the main event of that show was AJ versus Angle in a ladder match, and I fucking turned up on the wrong day. If I turned up the day after, I would have saw a ladder match, but this week I saw a takedown challenge. But I couldn't believe how small the Impact Zone was. It's literally just a TV studio. Like on TV it looks big, it looks really cool and that sort of thing, but it was back when they had like the two separate entrances on two different sides of the arena. Like one would be for the heels and one would be for the baby faces and that sort of thing. And we were at the very, very back row. And I remember just being like blown away of how close I was to the ring, even though it was the very, very last row. And we were right next to the heel side, and I remember Angle coming out and his pyro going off, and I remember feeling like how hot the pyro was because we were so close to it. I just couldn't believe how close we were to the ring. It was such a small TV studio, you know, but that was an amazing experience. And oh god, I wish they still did it, because I was in Florida in 2018, and if they'd still taped Impact, I would have been there in the heartbeat. But that's such a good memory, man. One of my favourite memories of my childhood for sure.
Bloody hell, though. Why have you never told me that you went to the Impact Zone? That is amazing.
I don't know why I never told you. I guess it's just It's never came up. I don't know, but there you go. That's what this podcast's for. Sharing memories like that. Give me another one. You do one.
Right. Well, you mentioned TNA. I've been to one TNA show in my time. I remember you were there at this one as well, January 21st, 2013. And that was the show which was the show was stolen by Austin Aries versus Bobby Roode versus James Storm.
That's right. Yeah. That was a good match, yeah.
Yeah, it was a great show. Earl Hebner got his own entrance
Nice.
and did the whole kind of Bret Hart, I screwed Bret thing.
Damn right I did.
I also remember when the Knockouts were wrestling, he lingered about the stage and watched the match. I thought that was kind of creepy because they didn't do that for any of the other matches. He wasn't reffing. But the main event was Sting and Kurt Angle versus Doc Gallows and Devon.
That's right.
Devon Dudley, brother Devon. And I'll never forget that before the match, they announced the cage takes exactly 22 minutes to put up.
That's right.
And so they take all this time to set the cage. And the other sad thing about that show was that Sting wasn't even supposed to be there. It was supposed to be Jeff Hardy, but that was the first year that it had become clear that for quite a long amount of time he wasn't allowed to go to the UK.
Jeff was the world champion at the
until
time.
He came back to WWE.
Yeah,
That's when
yeah.
that whole thing expired. I felt bad because there was, it wasn't that far removed from Jeff last being in WWE 2 or 3 years, and there were a lot of wee kids dressed up as Jeff Hardy at that show.
Yeah.
For me, I was stoked because it was to this day the only time I've ever seen Sting live.
Yeah, me too.
And so that even but I remember Kurt Angle was asleep for most of the match. Do you remember this? Because he got knocked out.
He was like attacked on the way to the ring
floor.
or something.
God, he must have had another broken freaking neck. But that was cool for me because I didn't know if I would ever get to see Angle wrestle again, which I did. I get to see him again after that at the ICW show that he wrestled Joe Coffey. But
yeah.
That was a cool novelty experience. I went there with my friend Jamie, and he was really, really into TNA at the time. I definitely followed it, and he definitely followed it more. I think he watched the weekly programming. We were both really excited for that show. I remember seeing you at the lobby beforehand and kind of waving to you from afar at that show. I don't know if we actually got to talk that night, but
know.
That was my only time seeing TNA, but it kind of pales in comparison to the Impact Zone. I remember Billy Ray doing the whole hulking up thing as well in the absence of Hulk Hogan actually being there.
Well, Billy Ray was a really good babyface around that time, but then he actually turned into one of the best heels in the whole business at that big, I swear, of lockdown that year.
Yeah.
Because he went on to wrestle AJ at that year's Bound for Glory, and it was great.
Right.
I remember JB wasn't there, so it was this random ring announcer.
Well, Christy Hemme was supposed to do it, wasn't she?
Well, yeah, but JB always did the UK tours, like the ring announcing.
That's right.
So it was just this random guy, and he had to go, please let the cage be built. It will take exactly 22 minutes.
And you know what? Fair play. It did.
I remember just sitting going, when on earth is this going to be ready?
Oh dear, that's something at least I love about the cages in WWF, like post the New Generation era, the mesh ones, that the music they would play when they would lower down the cage, the jum 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 jum.
Brilliant.
You almost want to go flash.
See, Rebellion 01 was the cage pre-built.
Yeah, they built it after the Dark match with Lance Storm and Justin Credible and Billy and Chuck.
Ah, right.
And they brought it down in bits. Like, that was one of the last times they used the that kind of New Generation cage, because I think the last time that cage had been used, that actual physical cage design had been used, was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
That's right, yeah.
Austin and McMahon, because they were well into using the mesh cage by that point, but whatever, they must have only had the old one in their warehouse in the UK. So I was a bit disappointed when it was that cage, because I wanted the other one, and all the graphics had like the mesh cage when they were advertising the match. But it was still cool. Like, that's the unforgiving kind of.
Still looks really cool though. Do you know what I mean? Did you know when they were bringing the cage out for the 2013 TNA show, it was like Noam Dar and Kid fighting that was doing it, bringing the cage out?
Was it really?
Yeah. I remember going, oh, look, there's Noam Dar doing the cage.
I had no idea. Like, I didn't know the roster that well at that point. That's awesome.
Okay, I guess a couple more then. So I tweeted about this one last night, actually, and it was from September the 4th, 2010. Okay. And it was the second ever ICW show that I ever attended.
Oh, of course.
Now, from around this time until maybe about 2013-ish, me and my dad used to travel all over the country to see these local independent wrestling shows all over Scotland. Like every couple of months we'd kind of make it a hobby and like make it an event. Every couple of months we'd travel to Largs, or we'd travel to Kilmarnock or Mabel or somewhere around the country to see these shows, to see whether it be PBW or BCW or SWA or one of these sort of independent Scottish shows. We'd kind of go and we'd travel together. I could take a pal, or we'd take whoever, my cousin or whoever it was, to go to one of these shows. And there was one in 2010, and it was at the Maryhill Community Centre Halls, which was about 20 minutes from my house. And originally it was in June that year, 2010. It was called Menace to Society. That was the first one I went to. So I kind of got familiarised with like the characters and the storylines and the company and that sort of thing on that show. But then in September of that year was the second one I went to, and it was called ICW Dazed and Confused.
Oh yeah.
And it was the first time. I like the original one, like the Menace to Society one, but this one in September, the second one I went to, it was really like me feeling like connected to independent wrestling, and I felt like it really opened my eyes to like it doesn't always have to be this big show like WWE or TNA at the time or whatever to be this brilliant event and to be this really, really cool show that we all attend. You know what I mean? It was like a really special show, this really small one. And at the time, there was like two sort of factions in ICW. There was the good guys, and then there was the heels. And the heels were called the Gold Label. And it was Wolfgang, Red Lightning, and Lionheart.
Yeah.
And one of the moments in this show, one of the babyfaces, Chris Renfrew, ran into the ring with a steel chair. And the heels, the Gold Label, kind of like ran out of the ring when he came in. And Renfrew launched a chair over the top rope into the crowd at Wolfgang. And Wolfgang got out of the way. And the chair hit my dad.
That's brilliant. He's hardcore. He's hardcore.
And I don't know what the reaction was or whatever, but it was just like in the middle of this promo, like this angle they were setting up for the main event. And I don't know if it was because like the cameras were on the ring or whatever, but like Wolfgang kind of turned to my dad and was like, "Here, mate, you alright?" He was like, "You alright? Sorry, I feel really bad. I didn't mean for the chair to hit you. I just didn't want the chair to hit me. Oh, I feel really bad. I'm so sorry." My dad was like over the moon. Do you know what I mean? Like my dad was perfectly fine with the fact he was involved in the show, you know? And he still like tells people that story as if like this sort of big happy memory back in 2010. That was a really funny memory.
That's a great story. Wolfgang's awesome. I saw he liked that tweet. I don't know what his ambitions are, but I'm convinced that if he wants it, which I'm sure he does, his future is only going to get brighter. Like that guy is money. Like he's something else.
Yeah, I love him. I think he's brilliant. He's got some form of connection to my best pal Paul. You know Paul from the old By the Way podcast that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. For some reason, I think it's like Wolfgang is Paul's auntie's sister's son or something like that. Like it's some real like random connection, right, between us and Wolfgang. And we actually went to see Wolfgang in a show in 2008 because it was like, oh, we're going to go see Barry's show. So we got free tickets to go see Wolfgang, right? And he defended the world title, I think it was the SWA world title, against Martin Stone, who is now Danny Burch in WWE and NXT, which is funny. But earlier on in that show, Lionheart actually won a Money in the Bank ladder match because of course he did. And at the end, when Wolfgang retained his title, Lionheart cashed in. And from that point onwards,
excellent.
Lionheart was always like this bad guy, and Wolfgang was always this hero. And you know they had this massive rivalry throughout all the years in Scotland and over the UK. Lionheart and Wolfgang, and I tell you something, Lionheart is someone that I miss dearly. Do you know what I mean? We lost Lionheart last year. He sadly passed away, and we absolutely shocked the wrestling business in this country to the feckin' core. And Glenn and I actually attended his tribute show at the Garage in Glasgow last year. It was just such a beautiful show.
Why don't we talk about that one? That'd be a nice one to end on, I think.
Yeah, good call. Let's chat about that one, then we'll finish up. For anyone who doesn't know, Lionheart was the ICW World Heavyweight Champion. He was by far the most experienced and best and most kind of like polished wrestler to not be signed to WWE or Impact or ROH or AEW, whoever from the UK anyway, in my opinion, definitely from this country. And he was like, well, you want to talk about the full package in terms of a wrestler. Like someone who was great in the ring but could also talk and had a good look and was tall and connected with the crowd and had a cool entrance and had a character and was a champion and had a lot of experience. Lionheart was just the full package, and I was always a massive supporter of him. And in the summer of 2019, it came out that he sadly passed away, and we couldn't believe it. It was it just totally shook Scottish wrestling, and it changed everything. Because not only because he was this brother and this loved character and this loved person, and this massive addition to the roster, but he was also the current world champion. It was just unbelievable. And then in August last year, they had a tribute show for him in Glasgow, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences. The atmosphere in that venue was unbelievable.
It's one of the most memorable shows I've ever been to. One of the ones that will always stand out in my memory. That show.
It was great. I mean, all the wrestlers, all of his sort of co-workers and his friends and his family all kind of came out, and they all, took their time, and they all said their piece, and they all had their own individual time to tell stories and remember him and that sort of thing. There was a music video at the start of the show with Creed, My Sacrifice.
I was crying.
Yeah, me too. It was just, of all songs, do you know what I mean, to pick... They had to go with that one that kind of means the most to me. It was one of my favourite experiences of all the wrestling shows I've ever been to. It was a special time, to say the least, and I miss him. The whole wrestling industry misses him, and I think he would be a shoe-in for AEW or NXT UK if he was still here. But I miss him, and I love that show. I love that show dearly.
It's something else. I remember by that point, like I'm still an ICW fan to this day, but I had gone through a phase, like a period of about 4 years, where I was there a lot. I was there almost every show that was in Glasgow. But by the time of Lionheart's memorial show last year, I wasn't going to them regularly, mainly just because of my job now. And the ICW shows invariably were on a Sunday, and it just would be impractical for me to be out late on a Sunday night when I was teaching early on a Monday morning. So I kind of stopped going to the shows, which was sad. But I really felt obliged to go there, and I actually think that show was on a Saturday. And it was like old times, being there with my friends, and this is a lovely thing to end the podcast on. And it might not feel like that in a sense, because we're talking about something which comes from something so sad and so tragic in his untimely passing. But what a brilliant example of how wrestling connects us.
Oh,
because
man, absolutely.
If you think about some of the saddest things that have happened in wrestling history, like Raw Is Own, the Eddie tribute show. Those shows have always been really warm and comforting because it's escapism and wholesome stuff in a time of really sad feelings. And there were a lot of people in that room that night who knew him well. You'd met him, and I think maybe in a Meet a Wrestler, you could possibly tell that great story of the contest and meeting Lionheart.
Yeah, totally.
I'd never met him. I'd been around him in a bar, and I'd know people who know him, but I'd never spoken to him or properly met him in the way that you had. And but everyone, whether you were in my position and you didn't know the guy, you were just a fan, or whether you were his friend, everyone that night felt it. And that was just a great example of how wrestling can take you on that emotional roller coaster. Our wee community, our UK wrestling scene was really, really wounded by that, and was really grieving and really, really hurt by it. The best way that we dealt with it collectively was by going to a show and watching these guys and girls do what they do best. Mm-hmm. What a fitting tribute to such a great guy, to someone who will never be forgotten, who will go down as the only undefeated ICW champion in wrestling history. And,
that made me smile.
And this sounds contrived because we're the Wrestling Connection. We talk about how wrestling connects us all, but you know what? In that room, in that garage, there would have been people of different faiths, different beliefs, people of different values, different politics, different views. People who would shout at you, about different and conflict over different issues, that divide people: Brexit, Scottish independence, coronavirus.
Yeah.
But we all had something in common that night, and that's what I love about these wrestling shows, is that when you walk through those doors and you see the ring for the first time, it doesn't matter what the values are of the person sitting next to you. You all have something in common. You all had that story about how wrestling connected you all. And that night, we all had that one thing in common. That night, we wanted to pay tribute to somebody that we all admired and really cared about. And, on some level, all these shows that we've spoken about today have done that. And I hope that we can talk about this topic again because there's been loads of other shows that we've not touched upon and that have had like a similar feeling for me. And I'm sure, all going well, the world will go back to normal and we'll all get to go to live wrestling again and get to tell more stories.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's I miss live wrestling dearly. But that Lionheart show, man, it was beautiful. That main event, it was Shaz Samuels and Jack Jester versus Polo Promotions. Like 4 of his closest pals or whatever throughout the business, and that was a special main event. I don't know what it was about it, would it be the atmosphere or the buzz or just because we all knew it was a tribute to him, but there was something special about that match, and it still stands today as one of my favourite matches I've ever seen live. So let's end it there before we go on too long. We'll definitely need to do a part 2 of this because there are so many other shows that we didn't even touch on. We didn't even talk about the TV tapings in 2016, the first time we got Raw and SmackDown in this country. I guess we'll talk about that in part 2 whenever we do that in a few weeks' time. But thank you so much to anybody who listened to this episode. We have loved this one because we have been talking about our own personal, memories and stories and that sort of thing. So we'd love to hear from you. If you have some funny favourite wrestling show memories, please send them in. We're on Twitter at WrestleConnect1. And we're also on Facebook, facebook.com/The Wrestling Connection. And we're on Instagram at WrestleConnection. You can find us on YouTube as well for exclusives and individual segments from the show if you can't listen to the full thing. And we will always be in touch with all of our listeners and our friends out there. Please subscribe for us wherever you've found us today. Please tell a friend. Leave us a review, leave us a rating, whatever you got to do. Please subscribe and do anything you can to help support The Wrestling Connection. Share the love, spread the word. We're going to be here for a good time. We're going to be here for a long time, baby. So we hope you join us on our journey. A wee reminder of the match of the week. The match of the week this week was John Cena versus Shawn Michaels from April 23rd, 2007 from Raw in London, England. Go check that match out this week and report back your thoughts next week. And until then, my name is Chris, this is Glenn. Thank you so much for listening to The Wrestling Connection, episode number 3. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves and each other.